Welcome back to Stardew Zoo, our Barnyard Animal Pack Zoo. This project is all about focusing on the details and building a rich lore for our zoo, inspired by the vibes and architecture of the hit game Stardew Valley. In our previous episodes, we've been steadily building up our farm. We started with a humble chicken coop modeled after the one in Stardew Valley itself, and we even added a small pond where native birds like our swans can come and swim. Next, we realized we needed to boost our profits, so we set out to work in creating some fields for our crops and setting up some pens for more animals, including the donkey and the Tamworth pig. But today, it's all about the grazers, because we have so much more planned for Stardew Zoo. So let's jump back in and get building for even more animals. Now, we've completely filled up our first island, which means it's the perfect time to expand to the other side of the river. I figure that the island in the middle of the river would be the nice, perfect place for our main town, but I have so many other plans in store for the rest of the farm, I can't wait to get to it. However, we need to find a way over there first. One of my favorite pieces from the Barnyard Animal Pack is not a scenery piece, but instead it's a blueprint. It's the perfect mix of faux rocks, which makes it look like a rustic old stone wall. I've been super inspired by some old world farms after visiting the countryside in Portugal, so I wanted to bring a little bit of that flair over here. I'm using the blueprint minus all the extra stuff, shout out to Ander Salamanders for his blueprint for it, to build up the perfect bridge. It's a perfect lead-in for the rest of the farm. After that, I decorated it just a little bit more by changing the colors and adding some reeds around it, and there we have it, a beautiful rustic bridge. Now that we have a way to get there, we're officially in the fields where we have 3 incredible animals we're going to be building for today. First on the docket is the beautiful Highland cattle. I love these guys. They have some of the best haircuts in Planet Zoo. Next up, we have the Hill Radnor sheep, another great addition to the game. They are just so fluffy. But what I'm most excited for, though, is the alpine goat. These guys have a ton of awesome colors in-game, and we're going to have our habitat filled with as many as possible, but they're also going to get a special climbing frame. But with that being said, let's jump right into it. I started the habitats with a brand new fence. One of my favorite things in Planet Zoo is making stuff from scratch. I know it seems a bit daunting at first, but trust me, it's so worth it. The barrier system in Planet Zoo, I think is pretty trash. They all don't really look the best, and anything you make with just a few pieces in-game can look so much better. I used a bunch of the wood pieces, I'm pretty sure from the tropical pack, to make a nice wooden fence over here that would highlight the area from the rest of the zoo. And after making a single selection of that fence, I was pretty much done. All I had to do was just place it over the entire section, duplicating it and duplicating it. It gets a little complicated at times. The terrain might slope up a bit too high, but that's nothing a hotkey can't fix. Since I'm on PC, I use the X key a lot over here, which perfectly aligns my stuff to the perfect slope. I just have to adjust it a little bit. After a bit of this tedious work, I think it turned out great. I can't recommend this process enough to anyone who wants to become a better builder. Try making your own fences. It's a fantastic start. All 3 sections of this habitat are partitioned out now, the sheep in the middle, the goats to the left, and the cows to the right. I tried my best to give them all a unique look about them, so let's jump into the details. Now, before we do get started though, I wanted to give a little bit of a heads up, mostly because this video might seem to be out of order. I love being able to showcase my stuff as best I can in the order that I make it, but this episode took me a bit too long doing that, and it just didn't work out for me. Instead, I tended to work wherever I could, sometimes here, sometimes there, so you might see some stuff completed in the background as we get through the video itself, so you might see some stuff that isn't really explained just yet in the video. Just be patient and I will. I've been loving this narrative format for my zoos. It helps them feel a lot more alive, much more than Speed Build Central, just as I did for Makulutano Safari Park, and I hope you guys like that approach too. So first up, let's take a look at the cows. I wanted to make sure that they had enough room to get out of the rain or snow if it ever does happen to pour down, so I made a barn for them. I tried my best to base it off of the barn that you can buy from Robin, and I get as close as I can, but I took a few liberties here and there with the design. Originally, my plan for the zoo was gonna have everything super inspired, look like a one-to-one recreation from Stardew Valley, one of my favorite games, but I think this is the episode where we take a little bit of liberties. Overall though, I think this habitat came out pretty great. I did my best to try and fill out the interior as I could, but I really wasn't given much, but the cows seem to like it. To the left of the cows lie our fluffy friends, the Hill Radnor sheep. These guys don't really lend themselves to much, not really much in terms of interesting habitats, so I got a little creative with it, just a little invested in what the typical happenstances that you would find around your farm would be, so I opted to do a little water well. Now the one I made is much less blocky than the one you can actually get in-game, but what I love over here was the placement of it. It's perfect, it's right in the middle of the habitat, and it helps to break out a lot more and make it a lot more interesting. I used a bit of those rock walls that I've been using before too to help it make it feel even more natural in this space. I did the same on the outside of the habitat too. I really wanted this part of the farm to feel a bit older, so making it feel like there was an older farm here to begin with, I made another silo, this one a bit more decrepit than our previous one, and some rock walls connecting the entire place together. I really love how well this came out. The island part of the zoo is really cool because it feels like Stardew Valley come to life, but this park I feel like I could put my own lore in here, my own little spin, it's really great. But all of that being said, our sheep habitat was officially done and they're enjoying just how grassy their habitat turned out. Before we get to the goats though, I want to talk a little bit about my foliage technique here and why I do the things I do. I know there's a ton of other foliage experts in the Planet Zoo community, but I've really fallen in love with the way that I've been doing my foliage in landscapes. First, I love to start with the small things. I like to make sure wherever my animals are walking would make the most sense, so I would trace those trails with a little bit of soil and these more congregated areas where you'd see a lot more guests, a lot more animals. I tend to make that a little bit more soily as well, sort of like they're standing on it or they're sleeping on it. Typically, you wouldn't have as much grass growing out over there. From there, I'm able to add a few more interest things like rock walls or cliff faces. I love this park especially though because I use these natural cladding pieces to make it feel even more natural. I also use some of the faux rocks as a way to give it a little bit more of a bumpy look to the place. Even though the game calls them faux, which means fake, I tend to use them in place of real rocks. I just love the texture of these and they can really help improve the look of a habitat. After my rocks are down, I get started on my grasses. Buffalo grass has to be one of the best things they have ever added to Planet Zoo. It's so good for any park you're working on, whether it's an African safari or a lot more of this farm kind of style. I go through the entire habitat within a single group, placing down grass as it's aligned to the surface, and once I do that, I simply sink it all in ever so slightly, just to make it look a little bit more interesting and make it look like it's not just plopped on top of the habitat itself. Sometimes I might even go over it again in a different color, maybe a yellow one, maybe a much drier one, just to help give areas a little bit more interest. Sometimes a green field really isn't what you find, it's never really uniform. I like to mix in these different colors just to help split it up. Then from there, I start to throw down a bunch of different plants. For a wide open field like this, I thought the flowers from the conservation pack fit perfectly. Since I wanted the fields to be a lot lower to the ground in terms of foliage, this was a great way to introduce a lot more color to them without using a lot more big bushes or shrubs. But that didn't stop me from using a couple of those, especially the dogwood rose bushes. These fit in perfectly around here. Around the field though, I added a bunch of hedges to the guest areas and some other trees just to help give a little bit more shade and interest too. But all in all, that's the entire foliage process. I didn't want to clog the video with this kind of like multiplied by 3 for each habitat. I know a ton of people are asking how I do foliage, so here it is. Now let's move on to the goats. The alpine goats in game are great at climbing, and while I thought it would make sense for them to use the goat enrichment, it turns out they can't actually use that mountain in game, which kinda sucks. So instead of that, I took to making it my own, kind of reclaiming it. I took that enrichment piece and I added climbable wooden beams so that the goats can still kind of climb it. It's just not all of them can. I have to pre-place the goats on there. But setting it up like this just made sense to me. Not only that, but I also added a few other miscellaneous climbing elements for them too. I love these tire ones that I made. It was super inspired off of some real life climbing enrichment that I saw for some goats. I just had to make it in my own park. That's how I got a lot of my inspiration. The only issue is, I made this exhibit for the sake of the guest being able to enter it, so I gave the guest walkthrough exhibit things like the soap dispenser and stuff, but for some reason they don't enter this. If anyone knows why, please let me know so I can fix it. I really wanted to include that. But after adding a bunch of enrichment, not just for the goats, but all the other species, our habitats for this episode are officially complete. With all 3 habitats done for this episode, we're nearing the end, and I wanted to thank you all coming along for another ride with me to Stardew Zoo. It was super fun building for these species. I know the Barnyard animal pack really was never anyone's fan favorite for Planet Zoo, but I'm so happy we have it. Farm animals are especially important in zoos, but I think some city zoos, especially like the Bronx Zoo or Queens, this is the best way for city kids and adults to learn a lot more about farm animals. Just like in Stardew Valley, how the player needs an escape from the city life, they come to the valley to be at one with how it used to be and how it still is for some people, and I really enjoy that sentiment. In our next episode, we're gonna trek a bit deeper into the woods and tackle some wild critters to help wrap the series up, and of course we're gonna be making even more buildings inspired off of Stardew Valley 2 in that. I might even consider streaming this at some point, so be sure to be subscribed and hit the bell icon down below so you always get a notification whenever I do go live. It really does help a lot, and I love to chat with you guys there. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and let me know in a comment below if you really did enjoy it, what your favorite part was, and if you learned something new along the way. I always do love to see that. But with that being said, thank you all so much. I hope you have the most wonderful of wonderful days, and we'll see you in the next episode of Stardew Zoo. Bye-bye now.